Hi, everyone, and welcome to the North Texas Teen Book Festival. My name is Farah Penn. I'm an editor over at BuzzFeed Books, and I am so excited to be moderating this panel today. This festival usually takes place in Irving, Texas, but this year we are coming to you virtually from many different places. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. And if you're tweeting or Instagramming about this event, please don't forget to use hashtag NTTBF21 on social media. I am so honored to be moderating this panel full of wonderful YA contemporary authors, including Julie Buxbaum, Mary H.K. Choi, and Phil Stamper. The theme of this panel is called Turning Point, the moments that defined you, which I think is very fitting for all of these books that we're going to talk about. I'm going to let each author quickly introduce themselves and talk a little bit about the book that they're promoting today. And how about we start with Julie? Would you like to go first?
Hi, I'm Julie Buxbaum, the author of Tell Me Three Things, What to Say Next, Hope and Other Punchlines, and most recently, Admission. And it is the story of Chloe Wynn Berenger, who at least at first seems to have it all. She just got into the college of her dreams. Her B-list actress mom is on her way to the B-plus list. The boy she's had a crush on since middle school just asked her to prom. And then one day the doorbell rings and the FBI is there to arrest her mother in a nationwide college admissions scandal. And it's a story about privilege and complicity. Yeah, that's Admission.
Amazing. How about Mary? Do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Mary H.K. Choi, author of Emergency Contact, Permanent Record, and Mol Yoke, which is coming out in a few days, which is why I can't feel my face. Yoke is about two sisters, Jane and June, who hate each other, but are forced to swap identities because one of them gets sick and doesn't have health insurance. And so it's all about identity, erasure, the constant comparison that is like foisted upon you as like a woman and with especially like one with a sister, and just yeah, like the intimacy of just uninterrogated personal myths and like the uninterrogated sort of mythologies around family members and what happens if you move to New York, start a fabulous new life, only to have the person who knows you best show up to be able to vet everything and how much that sucks. So that's Yoke, and that's coming out, well, came out just this week. So
Awesome. And then Phil.
Hi, I am Phil Stamper. I'm the author of these two books right here. My debut, The Gravity of Us, which this might be out of frame, so pretend it's there if it's not. The Gravity of Us was my debut. It came out in February 2020, but I'm here to talk about As Far As You'll Take Me, which let me find the not reflective. There it is. As Far As You'll Take Me is a coming of age story that follows 17-year-old Marty Pierce as he leaves an unwelcome living environment in rural Kentucky to go pursue his dream of being a professional musician in where else but the lovely London. Along the way, he is able to kind of understand his identity for the first time. He struggles with anxiety, as a lot of us probably do amid personal moves across the world. And he also falls into this friend group that kind of becomes his own family. And yeah, that came out last month.
Awesome. Excellent. I hope everyone at home is making note to pick up these wonderful books. I can confirm they're all really, really good. So I hope you guys go check them out. I'm going to go ahead and start by asking each author a question that relates to their novel, moving into some like open-ended questions for everyone, and then sort of ending with audience questions. So how about let's start with Julie. Your novel Admission is all about a college admissions scandal that completely upends Chloe's life. It seems like balancing accountability and privilege and awareness would be a particular challenge when crafting a story as timely as this one. Did you find it to be difficult?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly why I was interested in writing it. When the scandal broke, I became immediately totally, completely obsessed in a sort of unhealthy way. And I dropped a book that I was 2/3 of the way writing to write this one instead. And I think it's because it hits on all these larger questions about privilege. Obviously, the people in the college admission scandal way cross the line. But when we start looking a little bit deeper, we realize we're not, at least I'm not so sure where my own personal line lies. And so I wanted to dig a little deeper. I'm also a parent. And so I was fascinated by the idea of this new generation we're crafting, at least some parents are crafting, right? Where they tell their kids they are entitled to everything in the whole wide world. And at the same time, given the message that they're completely incapable of getting it on their own. And what kind of people does that create when they're already growing up in this ridiculously privileged environment? And so, yeah, I mean, I wrote the book to tackle that and to look and to sort of interrogate complicity, because the college admission scandal is so interesting to me because it's actually, there's a whole world in which it's totally legal. These people just didn't have just enough money to do that, right? Like they couldn't buy the building for their kids, which would have been legal. And so there's these interesting lines between legality and ethics. And anyhow, I was totally fascinated. And yes, that's exactly why I wanted to write this book and sort of interrogate it for myself.
Yeah, and it's interesting you said that you dropped a book that you were writing 2/3 the way through. Have you now finished that one?
I have. I went back to it this year. It took me a little bit longer to get back into it. I don't recommend leaving a book and then coming back to it because it took me a while to remember not what the book was about, but why I was interested in it. And I sort of had to dig dig back in. And it took a couple of months to be like, wait, I know where the story goes, but why? Why does the story go there? Like what kept me interested in this for 10 months or a year last year? But I figured it out and now I'm very happy with it. But it definitely made me lose like 6 months of work just to sort of jump in. Don't do it is what I'm trying to say.
Getting back into that headspace can be a bit tricky. Well, excellent. I'm going to move over to Phil and ask you a question about As Far As You'll Take Me. It is your sophomore novel set in London and features a teenager named Marty who was really struggling within his own hometown and looking for an escape. And in the very first chapter, he says, "I'm gay and I'm suffocating," which I think really sets the tone of the book going forward. How was writing Marty's story different from writing Cal's story in your debut, The Gravity of Us? And was it any harder or easier to write?
Ooh, yeah, it was a different experience. I'll just say that. To actually kind of going off of Julie's point of coming back to a story after you've left it, I wrote As Far As You'll Take Me before I wrote The Gravity of Us. That was on submission to editors of an older version of it that was not what it is today. Um, it was out, on submission. I was hoping it was going to be my debut, and then I wrote The Gravity of Us, and then it kind of all clicked from there. And then when it came time to talk about my second book, my 2-book deal, I went to my editor and I said, "Look, I have this manuscript. It's literally the book of my heart. I think there's really something here. I will rewrite it if I have to. Just like let me know if there's something." And then like hoping she wouldn't say no because then I would be sad. But she came back and said like, "Yeah, I mean, there's definitely something here. I love Marty. I love Marty's journey. However, like these are the things that'll have to be changed." And I had to completely rewrite a book that I had shelved like a year or two prior, which was really challenging to do because you have to get back into the core of what the book is and why you wrote it. And I was in a different place in 2018 when I was rewriting this versus 2015 when I started writing it. Um, and it's the line that you chose actually is really interesting because that was not in the first draft. That was something that really came to me. Um, it came to me as soon as I started rewriting the book. Once I was like reliving Marty's experiences and really understanding who is this character, I really wanted to portray someone who, kind of like me when I was growing up, was in a rural town that they felt like they needed to escape. And when you're in that world and you've known you're gay, like you've known you're gay since you were 6, it can feel really suffocating because you're not being your kind of true self. You see people on like TV and everywhere being like, oh, move to New York, you'll be perfect and gay and happy. And then you like see that life for you and you're like, oh, I definitely can do it if I can just get there. And then once you get there, you do have all of those joys of like, oh wow, I can actually live this experience that I have been begging for my entire life. But then you realize it's also not exactly exactly what you make of it, or what you were hoping it was going to be, because it's a challenge. Any sort of huge move like that is a challenge, and you don't realize how much you're relying on your home, um, until you find a new one, which Marty does kind of throughout the story, and kind of reconciles his feelings with his family, and it's a whole journey. But as far as the writing of this, it was much more of a challenge than if I had drafted a new book. And I drafted my third book that's coming out in 2022. I drafted that in the very beginnings of the pandemic, kind of at my lowest morale, and that was still not as hard as rewriting, as far as you'll take me, kind of years before that. So I'm very glad to have it out on the shelves so that I do not have to touch it anymore, because I'm happy with it, and I'm ready to move on and celebrate it, instead of tinkering with words for 3 years.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's so interesting that this was written before The Gravity of Us, and it's one that you came back to and you were working on for years, and saying it's the book of your heart, and going to your publisher and being like, I think this is going to be the sophomore novel. Like, what do you think? And then having that support is really, really great.
And truly, I think it does fit more as a sophomore novel for me, because with The Gravity of Us, I was able to show this kind of this unique world, that I was able to build with the NASA launch to Mars, and then the space race theme with a reality show, and all these things that work together like perfectly for me. Wonderful love story in it. And then I'm able to follow it up with something that's a little bit deeper and more emotional for me personally. And I think showing your more vulnerable side in a second book is actually really nice, because you can kind of see the range there. And that's what I was trying to do with this one. So I'm glad it worked out this way, even though 2015 Phil would not have probably said that.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to move over to Mary's question now. Mary, Yolk to me is a lot of things, including a book that deeply explores a relationship between two sisters. Jane and June are so different from each other, and they each have a little bit of hardness and resentfulness towards each other. What pulled you to wanting to write a sister dynamic in this way?
I think I was really sort of intrigued by like, like we all contain multitudes. And so it was a really sort of fun exercise. And by fun, I mean like gruesome and excruciating and so painful and intolerable to write. Like these like dualities, right? Where you have this notion that you should have this kind of intimacy. You should have this kind of belongingness. It would be so nice if you were kind of like mirror copies in certain ways in your personality or your character, or even what you liked and didn't like. But I had two people that completely dispel each other. And it's that sort of dispelling that isn't even just cut and dry. It'd be one thing if it was just like, oh, like I hate you, like pheromone wise, vibes wise, like we are just the opposite. It's not an indictment. We're just not same. But it's that thing where you love each other so much that it has a sort of like tender, corrosive quality, especially if the family that you grew up in never modeled affection for you, or never modeled intimacy for you, or what that looks like, where you're like, intimacy, I know what that means. It's something that, like, I don't know, like live, laugh, love people talk about, but I don't know how to do it. Like, where do you put your hands? Or like, where you think, like, it's like doing Kegels. You're like, what am I doing to have an intimacy with you? Like, and so these guys love each other so much and they just don't speak. And that fraughtness and that sort of like, I love you, I really wish you accepted me, but you don't seem to. But F you if you think I'm going to ask you to accept me. And that just becomes this sort of thing. And then it's like, the dream of moving to New York. They both moved to New York from Texas. They have disparate dreams. Like June immediately got a finance job, did really well, full ride to Columbia. Jane is like, her career aspirations are a little bit of like a, like a page not found 404 error message. She's like, oh, I don't know. And so it's them interrogating the things that are accessible. So what is accessible to them? Just like picking on each other or like pissing each other off. It's like they're just stuck in that place where you're like tugging each other's hair because you like love each other. Like they're just stuck there. And so when June gets sick and needs Jane's health insurance, they're just foisted into this like thing, and then they sort of live together, and it's both horrible but also very healing and soothing. And and just really uncomfortable. Like feelings are so uncomfortable. But so it wasn't the best headspace to live inside of during pandemic. And actually that's sort of, not to like turn around and ask you guys questions, but like, did you guys find it intolerable to have to revisit other things when you were told that you also had to like shelter in place and stay at home? You know what I mean? Like the fact that you had to like go inside this book and then like put it on again. And I can't imagine having to have like do that in these hashtag times. Like, was your book like, no, we're closed, you spurned us, and like a lover, I am now bitter? Like how, like I can't believe they let you guys back in. Like that's
I
my
feel like
greatest fear.
I feel like for me it was more time. Like time didn't let me back in, not the book itself. These are such weird times where life has been imposing on everything. I have two kids distance learning at home. I have no childcare other than my husband. And so there's none of that like ruminating headspace that I used to get pre-pandemic, where I used to just be able to think and let myself play in my playground. I don't get a playground anymore, and so that's been the hardest part for me in terms of getting back in. It's the book itself is just like waiting there, being like, "Come, spend time with me," and I'm like, "Sorry, dude, I have dishes to do and butts to wipe."
I mean, it's hard to get into that headspace, I think, with these unprecedented times, which are just times now. um, because like I had to revise, I had to draft, I had to do all kinds of different creative work through this time. And every time I tried to, it was really hard for me because I live in a 1 bedroom in Brooklyn. It's really small. I have a full-time day job that I was also doing from this exact same kitchen table where I eat my meals, where I write my books, where I do this. And having no division between them, I was like, I would rather just kind of curl up in my bed in a ball with my weighted blanket and do creative stuff tomorrow. And I kept doing that until I was like, I have deadlines. And I met some of those deadlines, but like it's such a I don't know how you can get into that creative space, because for me you need division to like click from like, okay, I'm not at work anymore, I'm at my author work, and now I'm eating with my husband. So like
Yeah, it's like the head up display is like the same thing over and over
yeah,
again. So it's
it's
just so hard, which is a fun thing to talk about.
No.
Sorry, Farah.
but
I'm like, wait.
No. Actually, this is
we're all
ties into
feeling
a
it.
question I like wanted to ask you guys a little bit later, but I'll bring it up now. Do you have a piece of like writing advice or something that has worked for you like during these times that sort of like motivated you or like kind of kept you going to help inspire others who are trying to write during this time too?
I'm a disaster. I could lie and tell you, it's really helpful to like put on your cozy pants and make a cup of tea and have a ritual. I mean, I can make up nonsense for you, but the truth of the matter is my life is a complete disaster right now. And I'm in 100% struggling survival mode in terms of like keeping my children happy and going to school, and I'm working when I can work. But so I guess my only piece of advice is like, this is a pandemic. It's all of our first pandemic. Um, and so you can't be good at pandemics. At least that's what I tell myself every day. And so I think be nice and kind to yourself and do the best you can. And if writing is something that gives you comfort and peace, then do it, because that's self-care. But if writing right now, it doesn't work because life doesn't allow you to, that's okay too. I mean, it's not
Yeah.
really okay because it's my
And
job, but
yeah, we have deadlines that we can't push sometimes, but like if you don't have those, like it's really hard to motivate yourself. But then also, like, what is the value of motivating yourself and trying to bring creative energy out of something, and then when you can't, shaming yourself, which is what always happens to me when I'm like, oh, I finally scheduled out my hour writing break and I have 4 words and I hate them all. And so I think that's just what we have to take. Like, it's literally one of those cliche, take it one day at a time, like do your best, be easy on yourself, kind of situations where it's just we don't know, we are professionals at this and we don't know what we're doing. We're struggling too, so no, you're not alone. And like, just remind yourself that like everyone's dealing with this. Like, we're going to try and get some words this weekend, and then just like set those kind of bars.
I just realized I do have one tip, actually, one thing that did work for me, and that was to fundamentally change what I write. I have this other project that is totally different than anything I've ever done, that I just started doing because it was fun. And it was something I could do right now. My headspace allowed it. And it was just like I just ran away with it. And it's going to be a real project. So I think allowing yourself to explore areas where you haven't explored before purely because it brings you joy could actually result in real writing.
Totally. I mean, I think I'm gonna mirror what you guys said, which was that like, yeah, you kind of have to go into it already forgiving yourself. Like, I am a total workaholic. I'm like an addict by nature. Like, I love thwarting any and all feeling, like any, like even joy. I'm like, seems dangerous, you know. So like, anytime I get a feeling, I just want to do something. And so historically, that's been like drinking, drugs, or like eating disorder, or just obsession, or like shopping, or like putting everything in your cart and then just walking away, you know, like that kind of behavior. And so I can write in that way. And I can get like, I can do like 2, 3K words a day easy. None of them are salvageable. It is like waking up in the middle of the night to write down like the dream, and you're like, this is genius, multi-million-dollar film franchise, and you wake up in the morning and you're like, oh, this is like pure garbage. It's that. And I definitely had a moment in the Panettone where I was like, oh, this is how you like burn out and have nothing to show for it. And you can gaslight yourself and be like, oh, like there's no intrinsic value in anything that you do, and then you just sort of like atomize. It's a really bad place. And so if you have like 45 minutes of like semi decent work, awesome, because you're writer, and I say that as like a totally disjointed sounding person. Like, I have to honor my writer because my writer does not like to be pushed around. And if I white knuckle force my writer into a situation, like, she does not enjoy that. And I like, I will just be shut down on so many different other ideas. And so I just sometimes have to watch television.
Um, I mean, I think that's important that you guys are just being so honest about this because it is hard, you know, but also important to acknowledge, like, do like find the thing that is like bringing you comfort or joy and just kind of like gear towards that if you want to at the moment. I would love to just sort of circle back to this panel's theme. And without giving too much of your book away, what was the defining moment for your character, or if your character had many defining moments, maybe pick one without giving us too many spoilers. And then what compelled you to specifically write about it? So do we want to start with Julie, maybe?
Sure. So since my book is a fictionalized take on the college admission scandal, I think that we would assume the defining moment is figuring out whether the mom did it or didn't. But I decided on like pretty much page 1, we know the mom is guilty. There's no doubt about that. Instead, the larger question that hopefully will keep people reading is how much did Chloe know, the girl, the daughter at the center of it, and when did she know it? And instead of having a single defining turning point, I thought it was so much more interesting to play in that gray area of knowing and not knowing, especially when the not knowing serves us. And so throughout the book, there are little moments. There's a then and a now, back and forth. And in the then, we watch her go through the process of applying to college. And in the now, we see the fallout, right? And it goes back and forth. And the then is so much more fascinating knowing where it's coming, where it's going, because otherwise, the then would just be a girl applying to college and there's some weird stuff going on, right? Um, and we watch her have a series of defining moments where things seem fishy and she has to make decisions each time. And we get to watch her headspace of sort of self-justification. I don't want to give too much away of what she knows and what she doesn't. But that space, that in between is so much more interesting to me, where it's not clear. Because in life, there's so many things we know but don't really want to know because it hurts us to know. Those are the most dangerous things, right?
Yeah, I think that's like super interesting to explore, especially in a book told like in the now versus in the then. How about Mary? Do you want to go next?
Yeah, I mean, jumping off of what Julie was saying, it's just like, I agree that sort of gray space especially with YA, right? Like everything is just this coming of age situation. A lot of the stakes come from like newness, or like just having no reference for this particular immersive, like all encompassing experience. Like I often like liken YA to like horror, where it's just like the stakes feel so high because, you know, you really, if you've never done anything before, you think that the worst possible scenario is akin to death. You're like, I will be a social outcast, and that's just like spiritual death, you know. And I do think it's like really so interesting what happens in the realm of like plausible deniability. You know, when you are a young person, you are in these situations where not only are you being groomed either by people or like circumstance or workplace or like academic institution. There's just like all of these things where you're not to be like your morals are really bendy and tenuous, because I'm not saying that. It's just like nothing. I mean, all systems have been proven not to be a binary. And I think that there's so much more transparency around that and what that means. And so in my book, June is sick. June is sick. That is like, it's a brand name sickness. Like cancer, there's something very binary feeling about cancer. It's just like, oh God, like I may not have personally had it. I may not have advocated for someone who has it, but I may not be in the medical profession, but like I know what that is, and that sounds awful. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the ways in which Jane is sick, and the ways in which it is really easy to deny that she's sick. And the way that she's sick is that she deals with an eating disorder. And eating disorders are so insidious because it really is like camera one, camera two. You can really feel like you don't have one, or you can talk yourself out of having one or admitting that you have one, or and then just the shame takes over. And that's, you know, my personal experience with it. Like I struggle with an eating disorder. I was bulimic for a huge chunk of my life, and it's such a secret that becomes this like casual part of your life. And I find that also really interesting too. And like it's so corrosive and it's so slippery. And like I know so many people who go from like seeking help from an eating disorder and then not doing it, and just having that eating disorder just like chug along with them for another decade before they're desperate enough to seek help. And yeah, I just wanted to talk about like not normalizing, just being like really honest about that. So yeah.
How about Phil goes next?
Yeah. So there are a lot of turning points, I think, in my book, and I think that is indicative of YA, because especially character-focused ones, where stories where you grow and grow and grow because things happen. You have like 18 turning points, and that I think is what growing up is about. Honestly, that's what it was for me, I felt. Um, but I'm trying to think of like any specific moments that do stand out for me, and I think the honestly very very similar to what Mary was saying. Marty struggles with anxiety, and that's like a huge part of the book. He has on-page panic attacks. That is, you know, an immersive kind of reading experience that is definitely not for everyone. So content warnings if you do decide to pick up the book. However, he does also struggle with disordered eating that resembles anorexia, and it's on the page in a way that it's so kind of naturally happens because it's related to how he's dealing with his queer identity. And he when he lands in London, he actually falls in love with the very first guy he meets, which a little relatable for anyone who's like flown anywhere. Just because you're like, I have 18 boyfriends. I saw someone on the train. But like he actually gets to be in a relationship with the very first person he sees, and he thinks this is just a perfect fit, and he wants to hold on to it because he's been repressed for so long. And so the turning points throughout the book are how he changes himself throughout the story to really like it. He's harming himself. He knows he knows the decisions he's making aren't great, but he wants to hold on to that because this is the first taste of like queer love that he has actually been able to receive back. And so through your it's that's why it's kind of an emotionally taxing story for me, for because I shared all these experiences as well. And I think those little turning points throughout will ultimately lead to, no spoilers, but a turning point where he does understand kind of what he's doing to himself, not in a pretty bow gets wrapped on anything, of course, but I think that all leads up to the major turning point of the book, which I will not spoil, but it shows a lot of character growth and just kind of shows what a lot of teens can relate to, because we're all, I mean, I was a mess as a teen. And I think a lot of people would say they were too. And so you kind of have that moment where you're like, oh, this is a turning point in my life. I've just stepped into it. And then you have like 8 others where you're like, okay, that wasn't the turning point. This is the turning point. But for Marty, this is his kind of turning point. This is his moment.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting that all of you guys have written these books from like such not only a personal place, but like from kind of like digging deeper into and all these like internal complexities. And I think, it really resonates with the reader and like helps the reader like connect with these characters on a deeper level. So I just thought it was like so interesting to hear all about this. I think we can move on to some audience submitted questions right now. You guys are game for that. We have one audience member who wants to know, how long did it take to write each of your books? And Phil, if you want to start.
I'll start because I'm probably the longest. Because I started writing this in 2015. So yeah, 6 years. Or no, I mean, I guess I finished it in 2019. So finished the revision in 2019. So it took a good 4 years. Obviously, in that time, I wrote the entirety of Gravity of Us and sold it and revised it. But it's, the first draft for me does not take very long. The Gravity of Us, I actually wrote for Nano and I finished early, which NaNoWriMo is the National Novel Writing Month that happens every November. And I wrote it within like 3 weeks, which I've never done before. As far as You'll Take Me was probably a couple months, but it was still pretty fast for a draft. And then I spent a lot of time revising through, like, this was with my agent, and then later on with my current agent, and then also with editors who had feedback. So it's all a process. So writing it, yeah, that only took a couple months. Rewriting it took a couple months as well, but the revision process in between, that's what took years, really.
How about you, Mary? How long did it take to write Yolk?
It took my entire life. No, it took like it was really maddening. Like I'm also kind of like a fast first drafter, like total just like disgorgement of thoughts, like, TK personal growth, like just really like sloppy first drafting. But this one was really, really hard. I think it's because it was my third, and the thing is, like, writing 3 books, it sounds like, oh, it's your third, it's not your sophomore, but it's just, all it means is that I've only done it twice before in my life. Like that is
it doesn't
all
get easier
it at all. And like, so for this one, I was just like, oh well, this is kind of like, I don't know, just like I wanted this to be a more serious book. I don't even know what that means, but like I knew I knew that it had a certain level of gravity, because I didn't want it to be either just like, gallows humor and just bleak and sardonic and cynical, and I didn't want it to be just like just depressing, just very sad. Like I was just like confused about the tone. And then I was like, oh, this has to be in third person. And it kept wanting to be first person. And I was like, no. Third person is more literary. And so I fought with this book for like 7 months, and the book won, and I ended up doing it in first person. But I kid you not, I probably wrote around 30,000 words that didn't get used. Like I would write from the beginning to chapter 6, 7 of like 3 or 4 different versions. It was so gnarly, and I don't know what's going to happen with the book that comes after this, because I just I did something to myself, you guys. Like, I don't know what's going to happen now. But so yeah, it took like 2.5 years, but I don't know if I'm back yet. So maybe the clock is still sort of going, even though the book is out.
What about you, Julie?
It's interesting. So I've written, I think, 8 books now, 9 if you count the one in a drawer. Um, and each book has been such a different experience. The only similarity to every single book is when I sit down, I have no idea how to write a book. It never changes, where every time I start on page 1 and I'm like, wait, how do you write a book again? What? I can't do this. This is insane. And I actually keep my books on my new desk. It's not even a desk. It's an old IKEA table I found in my garage. But now that I have to work from home, it's now my desk. And I keep all my books on there just to remind myself that I have done this before and I know what I'm doing, even though I don't know what I'm doing at all. But this admission, actually, interestingly, was probably my easiest book, or at least my fastest, partially because it had to be. Because it's somewhat, inspired by a real life event. I wanted it to come out somewhat close to that event, thinking that, like, we wanted it to be fresh in people's minds and people still be interested. I did not really take into account a worldwide pandemic to sort of make this totally, we're a little less concerned now about college admissions, or, the whole college admissions process feels very different. But this one was fast and a little bit easier. I do believe, though, that how easy the book is to write or how hard the book is to write has hopefully no impact on the final product. I mean, I feel like part of our job, especially in the editing side of things, is to soften, and to just not give the reader the clue about how you were feeling while you were writing it. And every book should feel like a joy. It should feel like it was a joy for the writer, whether it was or not. And I have to tell myself that, because then when I'm writing the books that are hard to write, I'll be convinced that they're going to suck, right? So it's sort of this, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I have this sort of mental gymnastics I do when I'm writing. I don't even know if I answered the question.
I love that you said that. That's so reassuring that it doesn't affect the final product.
It's not even my own advice. It's from John August in Script Notes. I don't know if you ever heard that podcast, but I heard it years ago. They said, I don't remember exactly how they phrased it, but they sort of talked about divorcing the final product from your process and how they're not at all related. And it was so liberating to allow myself to believe that, because otherwise the hard books are going to be hard, right? Like, the hard books aren't going to be as much fun for the reader, but that's not true. It's our job to make them look good, right?
No, it's almost like this meta, like suspension of disbelief that happens, like, on some like weird like fourth wall. I don't even, like, I'm just like screwing up all the metaphors here, but like that's so reassuring to know that I don't get my personal whack juice and taint the book with it. You know what I mean? Like, just like, yeah, it doesn't need to have all the viscera still on it when it hits bookstores. And I hope that's true.
I mean, if you think about it, we have all these opportunities to clean it and to fix it and to sort of get your gook off of it,
True. So they tell me, yeah, true.
I'm going to move on to another audience question. Let's see. Someone is asking, when did you realize that this, writing books, is what you're meant to do? And does Phil, maybe, do you want to start? I'll kick off that question.
No, I don't know if I'm meant to do anything. I've never really had that kind of mindset, and it's always interesting. And I always like try to talk when I'm talking to teens, especially. I reinforce the fact that I'm not one of the writers who wanted to be an author from like when they were 4. Like, they don't have, people always like bring out books that they wrote at age 10 from like their drawer somewhere, and I'm always like, who are you people? Which I know is probably everyone, but like, for me it always felt like, well, I didn't want to do this my whole life, so like, am I an imposter here? Like, what does that mean? But actually, I had my own creative output. I was a musician kind of growing up, and I looked up to my piano as if you could see it. And I was a music major in college, which is why music is such a huge part of As Far As You'll Take Me. I was able to put so much of my love for the art in there. And it wasn't until after college when I was writing press releases for a living that I actually, um, I really loved that I was writing for a living, but press releases for a PR organization are not, they're not, it's not fun to write those things. They're really dry. I love that I was telling a story and getting paid for it, but it's not what I was wanting to write really. And at the same time, I fell completely into the Hunger Games world, the YA dystopian, Matched, all of the, like, every series. I read them all. And after a while I was like, wait, first of all, I think I can do this. I'm a good writer. I could definitely write a book. I'm going to write my own YA dystopian. And second of all, like, I, we'll see if I can do it, I guess. And so I tried. I was like, you know what, we'll just put a few words down. And when I started writing, I love the process so much, and I didn't just love the writing. I loved the business side of it as well, which I think is really hard to find that balance. I loved researching how to get agents. I loved that whole process, and that led me into a career in book publishing. When I got my master's in book publishing and creative writing, I now work for a major book publisher, not the same publisher that publishes my books, but I kind of have a double life. And it was around the time that I started writing my first, then my second book, that I was like, oh, I'm all in this world. I'm just trying to find my place in it. And once I started writing queer YA, once I wrote As Far As You'll Take Me, the very early drafts, that's when I realized that, like, oh, there's so much value in what I want to write and what I want to, like, put out in the world. And that's when it really clicked. But I had to follow 8 different creative passions, different places to even get to that point. So it was a winding road, but I got there.
How about Julie, author of, did you say 8 books right now?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. They're not all out, so I think we're at 8. Hi, what was the question?
The audience is asking, when did you realize you were meant to, like, do this, write books?
I mean, some days I don't think I'm meant to do it still, right? Like, it never feels easy. I mean, some books, again, are easier than others, but it never just flows. But I used to be a lawyer, and I quit my job as part of a New Year's resolution to write my first book. And when I did that, which is a terrible idea, no one should do it, but about a week or 2 into doing it, I had this moment where it felt more organic and natural, and what I was supposed to be doing more than anything it ever had up to that point. And so I feel like that's sort of the day I realized it was my passion and I wanted to be a writer. When I quit my job to write the book, it was more like, it's a bucket list thing. I'll figure out what kind of lawyer I want to be in the meantime. And I just got lucky that I ended up becoming a writer. But it was the feeling of putting words on a page and realizing just how spectacular that feels. And even now, the public side of all of this, I enjoy talking to readers, and I love the North Texas Teen Book Festival. It's my favorite festival. I've been going for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years now. It's my absolute favorite. So I love meeting readers. But the part of all this that is magical to me is when I'm alone in a room writing sentences, and that feeling it's working, where you're like, oh my God, I just nailed it with that sentence. Of course, 5 minutes later, I'm always like, oh my God, you're an idiot. But for 2 seconds there's that high that I don't get from anything else. And I think if you're chasing that feeling, I think that's what makes you a writer. I make it sound so unhealthy.
But it is unhealthy.
It's
like the most emotionally expensive thing I can ever imagine. And then the fact that I'm like, this is my dream, let's try to make money. It's just like so unhealthy. And every time I do it, it's like, first of all, I'm not a writer either. I kind of have the same backstory, I guess, with everyone. I wasn't the one who I was just like, this is my book, or like, oh, my immigrant parents loved the idea of me going into a creative pursuit. You know what I mean? Like, this is not my story. And so I never thought I could write books. I was into fashion as a younger person. And even then I was like, let's hedge, like, don't go into design, go into like retail merchandising. Let's go into textile sciences, like something. You can't design, like that's not a real job. That's a hobby. That's so my parents. It's like all the spores detonate like so many years later. But like, but it's that feeling. It's just that like I feel like writers are like the most insecure, grandiose people ever, where you're just like you're like, I'm such a piece of crap and everyone is obsessed with that. You know, it's like that duality. And I'm such a control person and I'm such an inside cat, and I don't like I like it when I have my lines and I give you your lines, and that's an interfacing. And like that's the relationship, you know? And so writing and sitting down and like, you know, I do have a lot of that healing of that, you know, this is medicine for me as a kid, or like I wish someone had written this about this when I was, you know, just that sort of level of representation, right? And that responsibility that I really take seriously of like, I want you to have a jolt of recognition. I want to say something ugly as a successful writer who you maybe know, and I want you to be like, oh, I have that, and I want that to be safe, and I want that kinship there. And like, I didn't know that I wanted to write YA. All I knew is that I wanted to talk to young people. And so this is just like a, you know, I'm still like fanficking like conversations I wish I would have with my mother, you know what I mean? Like forever. And that's what's always going to be a huge thematic aspect to my work. And yeah, I think it is a lot about catharsis. I think it is a lot of like workshopping. And but man, when you have a good writing day, it is just sublime. Like that communion with yourself and that small moment of like that just like taste of immortality, like, and that's unhealthy too. It's awful. That's why promoting a book is the worst. You're like, oh, I don't know her, please don't look at me, I'm hideous. But like that's that moment of like, damn, I'm alive and I'm like making a thing is just, it's intoxicating. And once you have it, it's like, why wouldn't you be a vampire? You know what I mean? Where you're just like, oh yeah, this is great. It's so painful.
Mary, I want to write down one of the things you said earlier. I can't remember how you put it. Emotionally something about writing, because it's exactly what we were talking about. Emotionally expensive. Exactly. It's exactly what we were talking about earlier about sort of almost professionalizing our neuroses and then having to shower them off later. You know what I mean?
This is therapy that I am selling. Like this is my own therapy that I'm like, please buy my trauma. Thank you.
But then we sanitize it, right? But then we have to sanitize it to sort of separate ourselves and to make it not representative of our own trauma,
names.
But representative of
no,
this.
Just kidding,
like there has to be this metamorphosis that happens in the process that changes it into something not cleaner, because that's not the right word. I used the word cleaner earlier, but I don't mean that. I mean separate,
something
right?
truly
like it has to be its own thing.
Like it needs to stand on its own. Yeah.
We're all basically like, and then there was this Frankenstein. No, but it is true. It's like putting it all into this other body, but you know, like that body keeps the score also. Right. So it's just like just trauma. That's basically what writing is. A trauma party.
I so appreciate like this honest and insightful conversation from you guys. It's so interesting. I really could just listen to you guys talk for another hour, but unfortunately we have to start wrapping this panel up because that is all we have time for today. Thank you guys so much for this great conversation. It was so enjoyable. And thank you guys at home for tuning in. We really appreciate you coming in and joining this conversation and for submitting these amazing questions. I cannot stress enough how great these books are. So please, please, please go check them out at bookshop.org/shop/NTTBF. You can find all these titles there. Also, you can go to www.northtexasteenbookfestival.com and find North Texas Teen Book Festival swag. Everyone loves swag. It's great. There's like enamel pins and tie-dyed masks and a lot of fun stuff that you guys should go check out if you'd like. And finally, there are a ton more panels happening today. So I will be checking out a lot of them, and I hope you will check out a lot of panels too with me. There'll be a lot more great conversations, and so I'm really excited. But thank you guys again for joining.
Yay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.